Well, good evening, friends. And tonight, it's Ghost Stories by Candlelight. I'd like to tell you a story tonight from the Robin Hood's Bay Ghost Walk. One of the greatest hits, you might say. A popular tale, often told to all ages. So this is a time to gather round with the whole family. And I'd like to tell you the story, the very famous story of the farmer of Robin Hood's Bay. A farmer who is legendary for something rather unusual. His name was Bert Marshall. Now we all know that Yorkshire farmers have a reputation for generosity. But sadly, in the case of Bert Marshall, he had a reputation for being stingy. Stingy, mean, tight, short with money, short arms, deep pockets. Yeah, get the drift. Bert Marshall, a mean and stingy man he was. And Mrs. Marshall, she used to feed the children porridge and water every single day for breakfast. And when they came home from school, she would take what was left of that porridge that had gone hard in the pan, and she would scrape it out and dump it on the table, cut it up into little pieces, and then give it to the children and tell them it was cake. "This is cake, now eat it," she would say. Mean old Mrs. Marshall. Meanwhile, Bert is outside fixing the fences with rusty old nails. The children are in rags. No new clothes for them for a long, long, long time. And it also happened that Bert Marshall, because he'd never invested in a toothbrush, had rotten, black, horrible, smelly teeth. Now, they were the kind of teeth that are just about hanging in there. The ones you get, you know, when they're about to drop out and they're just wiggling in the mouth. So people would avoid Bert because he had bad breath. But one day, Bert was down in the old undertaker's workshop. That's where they make coffins for the dead. And his best friend happened to be the undertaker, and Bert was idling away a few hours, talking, chatting, anything that meant he could pass the time without spending money. But he was chatting away to his friend while the friend, the undertaker, was laying out a fresh corpse in a coffin, the body of a dead man. And Bert just happened to notice that the corpse had a beautiful, shiny, pearly set of fine, false teeth. And he thought to himself, well, he doesn't need them anymore. And when his friend the undertaker had his back turned, Bert Marshall snatched the teeth from the mouth of the corpse, put them in his pocket, and he went home. And that night he handed his son a pair of pliers and he said, "Here, lad," he said, "do your worst." He said, "Pull them out." And he got his son to pull out what was left of his stumpy, rotten black teeth with a pair of pliers. Out they came. Ah, well, Bert had polished and got ready these fabulous teeth, and he went to put them in his now empty mouth. And oh no, disaster. They didn't fit, because of course they weren't his. But what do you do when you've only got one pair of shoes and you've got to get them on your feet and they might be half a size too small? You stretch them. So Bert got his mouth and he got his son to pull his mouth wide apart. And finally they were able to get the teeth in the mouth to fit. Now the thing is, Bert loved these teeth. He smiled more often. They say these teeth were so bright and white that you could see Bert Marshall coming over the skyline, teeth glinting in the sun like the headlights of an oncoming car. They would often see his teeth before they even saw his eyes. And he smiled more, and people were happy to talk to him more because he didn't have bad breath anymore. But unfortunately, the teeth were a little bit spring-loaded because they were so tightly jammed in his mouth. And sometimes, quite by accident, the teeth would suddenly shoot out of his mouth and fly through the air. But Bert became very good at catching them. He would feel them start to go, and he knew they were about to fire from his mouth like a bullet of a gun, and he became like a ninja. He was able to quickly back in the mouth almost before anyone had noticed. So he gained quite a reputation, did Bert. Quite a reputation. But you know, I haven't been entirely truthful about Bert and his meanness with money. If I'm really fair to him, I have to tell you that there was actually one thing that Bert Marshall did spend money on. Only one thing. But oh my goodness, he did not stint on this one thing. And it is the thing that every Yorkshire farmer likes to do when the jobs of the day are done on a Friday night, when he might have less to do over the weekend, although I think a farmer works 7 days a week. But all the same, Friday night is beer drinking night. But Bert Marshall would not drink the beer in Robin Hood's Bay because he said it was too expensive. So he used to take his poor, knackered, skinny old mare, old Bessie, and he would drag her up Bay Bank, that steep bank out of Robin Hood's Bay, and he would drag her to the top of the bank and ride her out along the old railway track, down to the Windmill Inn at Stainsacre, right by the train tracks. And if you go by Stainsacre, even now, you will find the Windmill Inn is still there by the old cinder track. But in those days, the steam trains used to come up and down from Whitby to Robin Hood's Bay and on to Scarborough and back again. So Bert would ride the horse beside the railway tracks, and he would get to the Windmill Inn. He would tie up Bessie outside, and he would go inside, and he would stand at the bar, and it was the only time he would ever take the teeth out on purpose in public. And he would put them on the bar next to him, on the bar. Now some might wonder why on earth a farmer would do such a thing. But you see, there's one thing about Bert. He did love his beer. And he loved his beer a little bit too much. And without the teeth obstructing his mouth, well, I mean, some people might say he took them out so they wouldn't get dirty. Some people might say he took them out to show them off because they would gleam in the candlelight. But the truth is, excuse me, the truth is that Bert Marshall would take them out because it meant there was nothing in his mouth to obstruct the flow of beer, and he could simply pour it down without obstruction. Without obstruction. Beer after beer, he would open his throat and tip it down. Now, one dark and stormy night, Bert Marshall left the Windmill Inn a little the worse for wear. He staggered out of that pub. He somehow managed to get back on his horse. I don't know what a drunken horse rider looks like. I really don't. Well, I've seen The Hunt once or twice. They always looked a little bit, you know, the worse for wear. But anyway, Bert Marshall, no one knows what happened to him that night. Nobody knows if he was knocked from the horse by the branch of a tree waving wildly in the storm, or whether he just slid off because he was so drunk. But the next day, when the steam train came up the railway line out of Whitby, chuffing up to Robin Hood's Bay, the train driver suddenly saw in front of him a man lying partially across the railway tracks. In fact, just his head was stuck on the side of the railway line. And the poor old train driver, he put that brake on, but it was too late to stop. And that train rolled straight across Bert Marshall's neck and chopped his head off. Crack! Well, as you'll imagine, the train driver was very upset, but it was too late to stop. So he went to Robin Hood's Bay, the next station, and he reported this tragic accident to the police. And the police returned to the scene of the accident to collect Bert Marshall's body parts. But when they got there, they found something rather unusual. They found Bert Marshall's headless body lying beside the tracks, and tightly gripped in his fist were, of course, the teeth. But the head was missing. The head had vanished. No head. So, of course, they looked for it. They looked for 2 or 3 hours for Bert's head, and they could not find it anywhere. In the end, one of the policemen scratched his head and he said, well, you know, he said, maybe a fox took it, give it to its cubs for breakfast. And another said, no, you know what I think? I think maybe it's stuck to the wheel of the train and it's gone off up the track. There were all sorts of ideas of what might have happened to Bert Marshall's head, and you could think about this for days and weeks. All I can tell you is Bert Marshall's family, they looked for his head for a whole week. They were terrified they might have to pay for 2 funerals, one for the head and one for the body. And it's just, you know, it's better if they kind of meet up for the final passing over. But anyway, in the end, Bert Marshall was buried, and before he was buried, his friend the undertaker made a special short coffin, and they put him in the ground, and there was a send-off for Bert Marshall. Music was played, songs were sung, beer was drunk, and they cheered him and said what a good fella he'd been, apart from his meanness with the money, which nobody was unkind enough to mention that day. And they thought that was the end of it, until people started arriving in the village of Robin Hood's Bay, having just disembarked from the last train of the night. And they would all arrive looking pale-faced and go into the local tavern to slake their thirst, and with a strange story that as the train was pulling up the track from Whitby, just going past the Windmill Inn and on, they suddenly saw from the window of the train in the light a ghost standing by the train tracks. And it was indeed the ghost of a headless man. But they said it wasn't just a ghost of a headless man. It was a ghost that kept running in and out the bushes. It was feeling around like it was trying to find something. But then it would suddenly jump back out of the bushes, and we saw it pull from its pocket a glowing, ghostly set of false teeth, and it started clacking them like maracas. Well, obviously, the ghost, the headless ghost, is trying to summon the head. But as far as I know, the head of Bert Marshall has never turned up. And so I always say to people, when you're staying in Robin Hood's Bay, beware that you don't find yourself on that old railway line at night, especially in the deadest, darkest time of the night, lest you too should see the Headless Horseman of Robin Hood's Bay. Until next time, more ghost stories by candlelight. Stay safe, friends. Be not afeard.